The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Heathrow Airport as Sergeant Major William Thompson approached the departure gate. His military bearing was unmistakable even in civilian clothes, shoulders squared, chin raised with quiet dignity, and steps measured with the precision that only came from decades of service to the crown. At 62, Thompson carried himself with the same pride he had shown during his 40 years as a royal guard, protecting the most important figures in the British monarchy. Thompson had served with distinction through countless state occasions, royal weddings, and diplomatic visits. His chest bore the weight of numerous medals earned through unwavering dedication, including the Distinguished Service Order and the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. Colleagues respected him not just for his military prowess, but for his gentle manner with tourists who visited the palace and his mentorship of younger guards. Today should have been a celebration. After 4 decades of faithful service, Thompson was finally taking his first vacation in years, a well-deserved trip to visit his daughter Sarah in Australia. She had moved to Sydney 5 years earlier for work and had been begging him to visit. With retirement approaching, he had finally decided to make the journey, using his life savings to purchase what he thought was a first-class ticket for the long flight ahead. As Thompson reached the British Airways counter, he presented his boarding pass with the same respectful confidence he had shown when reporting for duty each morning at Buckingham Palace. The young airline employee, barely out of her teens, glanced at his ticket with growing confusion. Her name tag read Jessica, and her expression quickly shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed irritation. Thompson noticed her reaction but remained patient, assuming there might be a simple mix-up with his reservation. He had booked the flight through a travel agent recommended by a fellow veteran, trusting that everything had been arranged properly. The anticipation of seeing his daughter again after so long kept his spirits high. Despite the early morning rush and the chaos typical of international departures, Jessica tapped her computer screen several times, her frown deepening with each keystroke. Other passengers in the queue behind Thompson began shifting impatiently, checking their watches and muttering under their breath. The departure board showed that boarding would begin in 30 minutes, and the gate area was filling with travelers eager to begin their journeys. Thompson waited quietly, his hands clasped behind his back in a stance that had become second nature during his years of ceremonial duties. He watched Jessica's face carefully, reading the subtle signs of frustration that reminded him of nervous recruits during their first week of training. Something was clearly wrong, but his military training had taught him patience in difficult situations. The airline employee finally looked up, her expression now showing open annoyance rather than professional concern. What happened next would set in motion a series of events that would reach the very highest levels of the British establishment, testing the values of respect, dignity, and honor that Thompson had spent his entire career defending. The decorated veteran had no idea that this seemingly routine travel encounter would soon become a matter of national attention, drawing the personal intervention of the newly crowned King Charles III himself. Jessica's voice cut through the morning bustle with shocking rudeness. "Sir, there seems to be some mistake with your ticket. This appears to be fraudulent or heavily discounted through some kind of charity scheme. We'll need to move you to economy class immediately, and there will be an additional fee of £800. Thompson blinked in surprise, his military composure momentarily shaken. "I beg your pardon, miss. I purchased this ticket through Sterling Travel Associates. Everything should be in order." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folder containing all his travel documents, organized with the meticulous attention to detail that had marked his entire career. The young employee barely glanced at the paperwork. "These discount military tickets are always problematic," she said loudly, ensuring that nearby passengers could hear every word. "We get veterans all the time trying to use expired benefits or fake documentation to get upgrades they can't afford. The system shows your ticket was purchased through some sort of welfare program." Heat rose in Thompson's cheeks, but he maintained his dignified bearing. "Young lady, I paid full price for this ticket with my own money. There's been no charity involved, and I can assure you my service record is entirely legitimate." His voice remained steady, though fellow travelers were now staring openly at the unfolding confrontation. Jessica rolled her eyes dramatically. "Look, sir, I don't have time for stories about your supposed military career. Half the people who come through here claim to be war heroes or royal guards or whatever. The computer doesn't lie, and it's showing this ticket was purchased through a discounted veterans scheme that's no longer valid. A woman standing behind Thompson in the queue gasped audibly. She had recognized the quiet dignity and bearing that marked genuine military service, having been married to an army officer herself. Other passengers began murmuring among themselves, some expressing outrage at the employee's treatment of the elderly gentleman. Thompson reached into his wallet and carefully withdrew a small leather case containing his service medals and identification. "Perhaps this will help clarify my credentials," he said quietly, opening the case to reveal his distinguished service order gleaming against dark velvet lining. "I've served the Crown for 40 years as a Royal Guard. I'm simply trying to visit my daughter in Australia." Jessica glanced at the medals with complete indifference. "Anyone can buy those at military surplus stores," she sneered. "We have protocols to follow, and frankly, sir, if you can't afford proper first-class passage, you shouldn't be trying to travel above your station. This is British Airways, not a charity organization for down-and-out pensioners." The insult hung in the air like a physical blow. Thompson's face paled, and for a moment the weight of 4 decades defending his nation's honor seemed to press down upon his shoulders. Around him, passengers were pulling out their mobile phones, some recording the encounter, others already typing furious messages on social media about the disgraceful treatment they were witnessing. An elderly gentleman wearing a military tie stepped forward from the queue. "I say, young lady, that's absolutely appalling behavior. This man clearly deserves your respect, not your contempt." But Jessica waved him away dismissively, turning her attention back to Thompson with barely concealed hostility. "Now, sir, will you be paying the upgrade fee and moving to economy? Or shall I call security to escort you from the premises? We have a schedule to maintain, and I won't have you disrupting other passengers with these theatrical displays." Her voice carried across the terminal, drawing even more unwanted attention to the decorated veteran who had spent his career serving in quiet dignity, never seeking recognition or praise for his sacrifices. The situation escalated quickly as more passengers began voicing their disapproval of Jessica's behavior. A businessman in an expensive suit stepped forward, his face red with indignation. "This is absolutely disgraceful. I've never seen such unprofessional conduct in my life. This gentleman deserves an apology, not abuse." Jessica's supervisor, attracted by the growing commotion, approached the counter. Margaret Henley had worked for British Airways for 15 years and prided herself on maintaining company standards, but she quickly realized the situation was spiraling out of control. The gathering crowd of angry passengers and the obvious distress of the elderly gentleman created exactly the kind of public relations nightmare that airlines desperately tried to avoid. "What seems to be the problem here?" Margaret asked, though she could already sense from the hostile atmosphere that something had gone terribly wrong. Thompson, still maintaining his dignified composure despite the public humiliation, explained the situation calmly while Jessica stood behind the counter with arms crossed, showing no remorse for her actions. Margaret examined Thompson's documents carefully, including his service medals and identification. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she realized the magnitude of her employee's mistake. The tickets were entirely legitimate, purchased at full price through a reputable travel agency. There had been no fraud, no charity scheme, and certainly no attempt to deceive the airline. "Mr. Thompson," Margaret said quietly, "I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. Your tickets are completely valid, and you're entitled to your first-class seat. Please allow me to escort you to the departure lounge personally." She shot a sharp look at Jessica, whose defiant expression suggested she still didn't understand the gravity of her actions, but the damage had already been done. Thompson's quiet dignity had been attacked in the most public way possible, his service to the Crown questioned, and his character impugned before dozens of witnesses. The elderly veteran accepted the apology graciously, but the hurt in his eyes was unmistakable to anyone who cared to look. As Thompson walked toward the departure gate, several passengers approached him to express their support and outrage over his treatment. Among them was Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a retired physician who had worked extensively with veterans organizations. She was so appalled by what she had witnessed that she immediately began documenting the incident on her tablet, determined to ensure that such treatment never happened again. Unknown to Thompson, Several passengers had recorded portions of the confrontation on their smartphones. Within hours, these videos would begin circulating on social media platforms, accompanied by increasingly angry commentary about the treatment of Britain's military veterans. The hashtag #RespectOurVeterans began trending as more people shared their own stories of poor treatment by service providers. Dr. Morrison took particular care in her documentation, noting Thompson's name, his service medals, and the shocking nature of Jessica's comments. As someone who had spent years advocating for veterans' rights, she recognized that this incident represented a much larger problem in society's treatment of those who had sacrificed for their country. The flight to Sydney proceeded without further incident, but Thompson spent much of the journey staring out the window in quiet reflection. The excitement of visiting his daughter had been overshadowed by the public humiliation he had endured. For a man who had devoted his life to serving with honor and dignity, the suggestion that he was somehow fraudulent or unworthy cut deeper than any physical wound. Meanwhile, back at Heathrow Airport, Margaret Henley was dealing with the aftermath of the incident. Passenger complaints were already flooding in through multiple channels, and the airline's customer service department was scrambling to understand exactly what had happened. Jessica, still showing no remorse, was sent home, pending a full investigation into her conduct. The recorded videos were beginning to surface online, and it was becoming clear that this was not going to be a matter that could be quietly resolved with a simple apology. 24 hours after Thompson's departure, the story had exploded across British media. Dr. Morrison's detailed account of the incident, combined with the smartphone videos recorded by other passengers, had created a social media firestorm that traditional news outlets couldn't ignore. The Daily Telegraph, The Guardian, and the BBC all picked up the story, with headlines expressing outrage over the treatment of the decorated Royal Guard. Television news programs featured segments showing Thompson's service record, highlighting his 4 decades of faithful duty, protecting the royal family and his numerous commendations. Military historians explained the significance of his Distinguished Service Order and the rarity of such recognition. The contrast between his exemplary service record and the humiliating treatment he had received at Heathrow Airport struck a powerful chord with the British public. British Airways found itself in the middle of a public relations catastrophe. Their phone lines were jammed with angry callers demanding action. Their social media accounts were flooded with criticism, and their share price began to drop as investors worried about the long-term impact on the company's reputation. Chief Executive Officer David Patterson called an emergency meeting to address the crisis and determine how to respond to the growing controversy. The airline's initial statement attempted to downplay the incident as a misunderstanding between individual employees, but this response only fueled more anger. Veterans organizations across Britain issued joint statements condemning the treatment of Thompson and demanding a full investigation into British Airways policies regarding military personnel. The Royal British Legion, the largest veterans charity in the UK, announced they were considering a boycott of the airline unless substantial changes were made. At Buckingham Palace, the newly crowned King Charles III was briefed on the situation during his morning meeting with private secretaries. As someone who had spent decades supporting military charities and honoring veterans' service, the king was deeply disturbed by the reports of Thompson's treatment. His private secretary, Sir James Crawford, had served alongside Thompson during ceremonial duties and could provide first-hand testimony to the Royal Guard's character and dedication. "This is absolutely unacceptable," King Charles said after reviewing the details of the incident. "Sergeant Major Thompson has served our family with distinction for 40 years. The suggestion that his service was somehow fraudulent or that he was trying to deceive anyone is not only insulting to him personally but to every person who has worn the uniform in service to this nation." The king instructed his staff to investigate the matter further and to explore what actions might be taken to address not only Thompson's specific case but the broader issue of how veterans were being treated by major corporations. The monarch's personal intervention in such matters was extremely rare, but the combination of Thompson's exemplary service record and the public nature of his humiliation had created extraordinary circumstances. Meanwhile, in Sydney, Thompson was finally reuniting with his daughter Sarah after years of separation. She had seen the news coverage of her father's treatment and was both heartbroken and furious about what had happened. Sarah, a successful marketing executive, was particularly outraged that her father's excitement about their reunion had been overshadowed by such unnecessary cruelty. "Dad, what they did to you was completely wrong," Sarah said, holding her father's hands as they sat in her apartment overlooking Sydney Harbor. "You've given everything for your country, and this is how they treat you? It's not right, and I'm going to make sure something is done about it." Thompson, ever the gentleman, tried to downplay the incident. "It's all right, love. These things happen. What matters is that I'm here with you now." But Sarah could see the hurt in her father's eyes, the way his usually straight shoulders seemed slightly bowed by the weight of the public humiliation he had endured. Back in London, pressure was mounting on British Airways from multiple directions. Parliament members from both major political parties were calling for investigations into the airline's treatment of military personnel. The Ministry of Defense issued a statement expressing concern about the incident and indicating they were reviewing their own travel arrangements with various carriers. The story had taken on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of how modern society sometimes failed to honor those who had sacrificed for their country. 3 days after the incident, King Charles III made an unprecedented decision that would send shockwaves through corporate Britain. During his morning briefing, the monarch instructed his private secretary to arrange a personal telephone call to Sergeant Major Thompson in Australia. Such direct intervention by the sovereign in matters involving private citizens was virtually unheard of in modern times, but the king felt that exceptional circumstances demanded exceptional action. Sir James Crawford worked through the diplomatic channels to locate Thompson's contact information in Sydney, coordinating with the Australian Governor-General's office to ensure proper protocol was followed. The call was scheduled for the following morning, Sydney time, giving Thompson's daughter Sarah enough notice to be present during this historic moment. Meanwhile, the pressure on British Airways had reached a breaking point. Chief Executive David Patterson faced mounting calls for his resignation as more details emerged about the company's inadequate training programs for dealing with military personnel. Internal documents leaked to the press revealed that Jessica had previously received complaints about her attitude toward elderly passengers, yet no corrective action had been taken. The airline's board of directors convened an emergency meeting to discuss the crisis. Share prices had fallen 12% in 3 days, and major corporate clients were threatening to cancel their travel contracts unless the situation was resolved. The company's reputation, built over decades, was being dismantled in real time across social media platforms and news outlets worldwide. At Parliament, Defense Secretary Robert Halifax stood before a packed House of Commons to address questions about the Thompson incident. The treatment of Sergeant Major Thompson represents not just a failure of customer service, but a fundamental failure to recognize the sacrifices made by those who have devoted their lives to protecting our nation, Halifax declared to thunderous applause from both sides of the aisle. The Defense Secretary announced that the government would be reviewing all contracts with transportation companies that served military personnel, and that new standards would be implemented to ensure veterans received the respect and dignity they deserved. The announcement was seen as a direct response to the Thompson incident and sent a clear message to the corporate world about the government's expectations. In Sydney, Thompson was struggling to come to terms with the attention his story had generated. Sarah showed him the news coverage on her laptop, including the parliamentary debate and the outpouring of support from veterans organizations across the Commonwealth. The elderly Royal Guard was overwhelmed by the response, having never sought any recognition for his decades of quiet service. "I just wanted to visit my daughter," Thompson told Sarah quietly. "I never intended for any of this to happen. All these people supporting me, the politicians talking about me in Parliament. It's all very humbling, but I'm not sure I deserve such attention." Sarah squeezed her father's hand. "Dad, you deserve every bit of support you're getting. What happened to you was wrong, and people recognize that. Sometimes it takes one person's story to highlight bigger problems that need fixing." The next morning arrived with an unusual stillness in the Sydney apartment. Sarah had taken time off from work to be present for the royal phone call, understanding the historical significance of the moment. At precisely 10 a.m. local time, the telephone rang, and Sir James Crawford's voice came through clearly from Buckingham Palace. "Mr. Thompson, I have the honor to inform you that His Majesty King Charles III Would like to speak with you personally. Please hold while I connect the call. Thompson stood at attention in his daughter's living room, his military training taking over even in civilian clothes. After a brief pause, the unmistakable voice of the king came through the speaker, warm and filled with genuine concern. Sergeant Major Thompson, this is Charles. I wanted to call you personally to express my deepest regret over the appalling treatment you received from British Airways. Your 40 years of faithful service to the Crown deserve recognition and respect, not the shameful behavior you encountered. Thompson was momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by the honor of receiving a personal call from the monarch. Sarah watched her father's eyes fill with tears as the full impact of the moment struck him. The King of England had taken time from his busy schedule to personally acknowledge his service and express concern for his welfare. Your Majesty, Thompson finally managed to respond, his voice thick with emotion. I am deeply honored by your call. To have served you and your family has been the greatest privilege of my life. I never expected such kindness, especially over what I considered a minor inconvenience. King Charles's voice carried genuine warmth as he continued. Sergeant Major, what you experienced was far from a minor inconvenience. It was a fundamental failure to recognize the value of service and sacrifice. I remember you well from numerous state occasions. Your dedication and professionalism never went unnoticed. The royal family has always been grateful for your unwavering commitment. The conversation continued for nearly 15 minutes, with the king asking about Thompson's health, his enjoyment of the visit to Australia, and his plans for retirement. Sarah listened in amazement as her father spoke with the monarch as if they were old colleagues reminiscing about shared experiences. The respect and affection in both voices was unmistakable. Before ending the call, King Charles made an announcement that would forever change how Thompson was remembered. Sergeant Major, I would be honored if you would accept an invitation to return to Buckingham Palace upon your arrival back in Britain. I would like to personally thank you for your service and ensure that this unfortunate incident doesn't overshadow the remarkable career you've had, protecting the crown. After the call ended, Thompson sat in stunned silence while Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. The magnitude of what had just occurred was almost impossible to comprehend. The newly crowned King of England had not only acknowledged her father's service but had extended a personal invitation to the palace, an honor that few civilians ever experienced. News of the royal phone call leaked to the media within hours, creating another wave of coverage that reached international outlets. The story of King Charles personally calling a mistreated veteran resonated far beyond Britain's borders, with news organizations around the world picking up the tale as an example of leadership and compassion in action. British Airways executives watched the coverage with growing alarm, realizing that their crisis had now escalated to involve the monarch himself. The company's legal team advised immediate and comprehensive action to prevent further damage to the airline's reputation and to address the obvious displeasure of the royal family. David Patterson, the chief executive, made the decision to personally travel to Australia to meet with Thompson and offer a formal apology. The airline also announced a complete review of their customer service policies, mandatory training for all employees regarding the treatment of military personnel, and a substantial donation to veterans' charities as a gesture of good faith. Jessica, the employee whose behavior had started the entire controversy, was quietly terminated from her position. Her supervisor, Margaret Henley, despite her attempts to rectify the situation, was demoted and required to undergo extensive customer service training. The airline's board made it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated under any circumstances. In Parliament, the Thompson incident became a catalyst for broader discussions about how society treated its veterans. New legislation was proposed to protect military personnel from discrimination and to ensure that their service was properly recognized by both public and private institutions. The Defense Secretary announced the creation of a new ombudsman position specifically to handle complaints from veterans about poor treatment. Thompson's story had transformed from a personal humiliation into a national conversation about respect, dignity, and the debt society owed to those who had served in uniform. Military bases across Britain reported increased interest from young people considering careers in the armed forces. Inspired by the public support shown for Thompson and the recognition that their service would be valued and protected, Sarah watched her father process all of these developments with characteristic humility. Despite becoming the center of national attention and receiving personal recognition from the king himself, Thompson remained focused on the simple pleasure of spending time with his daughter and exploring Sydney's attractions together. The elderly royal guard had inadvertently become a symbol of veteran dignity and royal compassion, though he would have preferred to remain in quiet anonymity. 2 weeks later, Thompson returned to Britain to find his country transformed by the events that had begun with a simple airline booking. Heathrow Airport looked exactly the same, but the atmosphere felt different as he walked through the same terminal where his ordeal had begun. British Airways staff members, now thoroughly trained in the new protocols for serving military personnel, treated him with exceptional courtesy and respect. The return flight had been upgraded to the airline's finest first-class accommodation at no charge, accompanied by a personal letter of apology from Chief Executive David Patterson. The letter acknowledged the company's failure, outlined the comprehensive changes being implemented, and expressed gratitude for Thompson's grace in handling the situation, despite the inexcusable treatment he had received. At Buckingham Palace, preparations were underway for Thompson's private audience with King Charles III. The meeting had been scheduled for the following afternoon, allowing the veteran time to recover from his long journey and spend time with old colleagues who had gathered to welcome him home. Word of his return had spread through military circles, and dozens of former royal guards requested permission to attend an informal reception in his honor. The reception took place at the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, home to the famous Chelsea pensioners. Veterans from multiple generations gathered to celebrate Thompson's service and to show their support for the dignity he had maintained throughout his public ordeal. General Sir Michael Harrison, former Chief of Defense Staff, delivered a speech praising Thompson's character and using the incident to highlight the broader issue of veteran welfare in modern Britain. Sergeant Major Thompson represents the very best of British military tradition, General Harrison declared to the assembled crowd. His response to adversity, maintaining dignity in the face of insult, exemplifies the values we strive to instill in every person who serves our nation. The support he has received demonstrates that the British people still recognize and honor genuine service. The following afternoon, Thompson arrived at Buckingham Palace wearing his full-dress uniform, his medals gleaming in the autumn sunlight. Sir James Crawford personally escorted him through the familiar corridors where he had walked so many times as a serving royal guard. The weight of 4 decades of memories filled every step as he approached the private audience room. King Charles III received Thompson in his private study, a room filled with personal mementos and photographs from decades of royal service. The king rose immediately upon Thompson's entrance, extending his hand in greeting rather than waiting for the formal protocols that usually govern such meetings. "William," the king said, using Thompson's first name in a gesture of personal familiarity, "welcome home. I trust your visit with Sarah was everything you hoped it would be, despite the unfortunate way it began." The private audience lasted nearly an hour, far longer than such meetings typically required. King Charles presented Thompson with a special commemorative medal, recognizing his 40 years of faithful service, explaining that it had been personally commissioned to acknowledge not just his military career but his grace under pressure during the recent controversy. "This medal represents more than your service record," the king explained. "It acknowledges your dignity in adversity and your unwitting role in reminding our nation about the debt we owe to those who serve. You have handled this situation with the same quiet professionalism you showed throughout your career, and that deserves special recognition." The king also announced that Thompson would be appointed as a special advisor to the royal household on veterans affairs, a newly created position that would allow him to help ensure other former service members receive the respect and support they deserved. The role was largely ceremonial but carried significant symbolic weight, demonstrating the royal family's continued commitment to supporting military personnel. As Thompson left Buckingham Palace that evening, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with Jessica's cruel comments at Heathrow Airport. What had started as personal humiliation had transformed into a national conversation about respect, dignity, and the treatment of veterans. New policies were in place at major corporations. Parliamentary legislation was being drafted to protect military personnel from discrimination. and public awareness of veteran issues had reached levels not seen in decades. The story became a defining moment in King Charles III's early reign, demonstrating his personal commitment to supporting those who served the crown, and his willingness to intervene directly when fundamental values of respect and dignity were threatened. Thompson's quiet dignity throughout the ordeal had reminded the nation that true honor came not from seeking recognition, but from maintaining one's principles, even in the face of unjust treatment. Years later, Thompson would continue serving in his advisory role, helping dozens of veterans navigate challenges with corporations and government agencies. The Thompson Protocol, as it came to be known, became the standard for treating military personnel across British industry. His story remained a powerful reminder that one person's courage and dignity could create positive change far beyond what anyone might initially imagine, transforming personal adversity into national progress and ensuring that future generations of veterans would receive the respect their service had earned.